I moved in with my cousin when I was 21 years old. We lived in a house in a place called Van Leer, which is surrounded by dense forests and is about 45 minutes from the closest city. Imagine the smallest town you've ever seen. You can drive through it in 2 minutes and wave to all 12 local shops. There are mostly farms that break up the large wooded areas in between, and there's a random gas station that is stuck in the middle of a fork in the road that leads to my house. There aren't many people there, and everyone knows each other. I moved in with my cousin in November of 2011, a week before my birthday. On some days, we had parties, but on most days, we just spent our free time playing video games and watching movies together. The house was built by the previous occupants, and they allowed us to stay for $250 per month, which was barely enough to pay the property's annual taxes. It had 3 bedrooms, with the main bedroom downstairs next to the living room and a back room that was an open porch before full walls were installed. I slept in the loft upstairs, with the bedrooms, bathrooms, and living area on one side of the house. On the other side, we had the kitchen and living area. We spent a lot of time there with our TVs and game systems, which were all on a 12T wall between the doors to prevent glare from the windows. This leads me to one of my responsibilities, which was to remove the kitchen scraps and dump them at the edge of the woods about half a football field away from the front porch. I did this virtually every day for several months after moving in because it saved me from having to wash the dishes. I became accustomed to seeing raccoons, possums, deer, rabbits, and occasionally even foxes or coyotes, which initially made me a little uneasy because all I could see were their eyes, or I would hear them sniffing and panting as I walked to the dumping spot. You know, they all knew that once I dropped the food and walked away it was free for them to grab, but in September 2012 I started having a new visitor who showed up regularly, and this one was way bigger than any coyote or dog I knew. I went out like always to toss out the scraps from dinner that night, but it was strangely quiet, no coyotes howling, no raccoons or possums making their usual sounds. As I walked I felt the hairs on my arms stand up, but I figured it was just because it was getting colder and maybe that's why there were fewer animals around. But when I got to the dumping spot and poured out the scraps, something really big growled at me and I could feel it deep in my bones, so I quickly finished scraping out the pot and slowly stepped back from the line of trees. I noticed a pair of yellowish eyes reflecting a little to the left of where I dumped the scraps. I kept staring at it as I moved back, never taking my eyes off the creature. When I got inside I told my cousin that there was a big animal out there tonight. I suggested we keep the porch light on to watch it in case it comes too close to the house. The rest of the night was quiet, but after that, whenever I took out the scraps, that creature would be there waiting for me to drop the food and step back. Its growl always gave me the chills. I never saw more than its eyes, and as after about a month it stopped growling. When I came out, even though I could still see it watching me from the woods. Fast forward to the ground was completely covered in snow in December, and it got really cold. I continued to feed that creature thing even when Christmas arrived. After we got home and settled in, my cousin fell asleep on the living room couch. I went upstairs to get some water, and when I woke up that night, I heard a little thumping noise downstairs and went downstairs to get some water. As I was going downstairs, I peeked over the railing and saw that my cousin was still asleep on the couch. I thought maybe there was something on the porch, but when I looked through the large glass doors, I saw nothing. It was really cold, about 7 degrees, so I didn't open the doors. I entered the kitchen while still watching the living room doors when I noticed a large dog's head protruding from the side of the door. It began sniffing against the glass door, and I was a little alarmed, but then I realized it was just a large dog, possibly the one I had been feeding for the previous few months, so I began to feel more at ease because I knew I had been gone for a week. I thought the animal might be hungry, so I took some turkey from the refrigerator with the intention of throwing it out the kitchen door onto the porch so it could eat. But when I turned back from the refrigerator and looked at the door, I initially froze when I saw its head, which was about 3 feet off the ground. Now, I was staring up at the creature's face, which was standing on 2 legs, much taller than me. It had to bend down to look through the door. I'm 6 feet tall and my cousin is 6 feet 5 inches. His head just about touches the top of his door frame, so this creature was easily 7 foot tall. I was shocked and couldn't move, really scared. What scared me even more was that the thing reached for the door handle to the sliding glass door and started pulling on it. My heart was beating fast and I heard the frame hitting against the door lock, but good thing we hadn't unlocked them since we got home right then. My cousin started waking up. He rolled off the couch still half asleep and walked towards the bathroom. That's when he saw me standing frozen in front of the glass door near the kitchen. He was about to say something when he noticed the dark figure at our door. The creature looked at him and growled. My eyes went back and forth between the two before I stepped closer to the kitchen door. My cousin, stuck in one spot, was really scared by what he saw. I grabbed the kitchen door handle and unlocked it. My cousin, barely making a sound, asked me in a whisper what on earth I was doing. I yanked the door open and quickly tossed the plate of turkey outside, then slammed the door and locked it. The creature saw the food flying towards the yard, gave me one more look and leaped off the porch to get the food. My cousin grabbed me and took me upstairs to the loft bedroom, which had a strong door. We stayed in that room all night listening for any sounds. After a few minutes we could hear it trying the door again, sniffing its nose against the window. It tapped on the window for a few minutes. When it found out the door wouldn't open, eventually it went away and vanished. I took the scraps out the following morning, but even though this werewolf thing didn't really act mean to us, I was too afraid to go outside at night. After that, occasionally we would see something in the yard at night, usually near where I threw the scraps. Every time we saw it, we would turn off the lights and TVs and watch until it disappeared back into the woods. We're not exactly sure what it is, but having something like this as a neighbor is both fascinating and frightening. I'm 15 years old and my family and I just moved into a new house. While we were unpacking, I noticed our neighbors watching us from their homes. Following my family's advice to be kind, I waved to greet them. However, I felt nervous when I saw a man in his 30s staring at me, and when he noticed me waving, his grin grew wide, making me uncomfortable. I went inside and checked out our new house. It was huge. When I got to my room, I noticed it had a pretty good view of the front yard. The only thing was people outside could see into my room too. My mom didn't like that, but I kept arguing with her until she let me keep that room. Since it was summer vacation, my mom kept bugging me to come outside and play baseball, as she really wanted me to enjoy the nice weather and make new friends in the neighborhood. So I grabbed my baseball stuff and went outside to play with my brothers and dad. When I glanced at the apartments across the road, I saw the guy from before. He seemed a little creepy, but he was all by himself. I asked my dad if it was okay to invite him to play with us. My dad, who tends to trust people easily, said go ahead. So I crossed the street and walked up to the guy. I asked him what his name was and he said it was Austin. I asked Austin if he wanted to join our baseball game and he said sure, as long as you're playing. We had a good time playing together. When the game finished, Austin went back to his place across the street waving and smiling at me. The next day my parents and brothers went out to pack more stuff since I Didn't feel like going. I stayed home alone, and I decided to unpack some things in my room. At one point I remembered that I forgot to lock the door like my mom told me. As I was heading to the living room, I heard the front door open and close. I thought it might be my mom or dad, so I was about to call their names, but a weird feeling made me stop. I stayed quiet and sneaked my way to the corner, peeking into the living room. To my surprise, it wasn't mom or dad, it was Austin. He had come inside and locked the door behind him. As soon as I noticed that, I got scared and ran straight into my room. I hid inside my closet, but I could hear his footsteps getting closer. He came into my room, opened the drawers of my dresser, and started searching. Then he left the room and went back down the hallway. I peeked out of the closet and saw all my underwear scattered on the floor. I walked quietly behind him in the hallway, hoping he wouldn't see me. I really wished he would just go to another room. He turned and opened the bathroom door, and I wasn't sure what he was searching for in there. As soon as the hallway was clear, I didn't waste any time. I sprinted as fast as I could through the front door, and then I quickly ran to the neighbor's house nearby. I was so scared when I got there I started crying and told them everything. They were really nice and called the police right away. They kept me inside until the police arrived. The police looked around, but they couldn't find Austin. Since that day I haven't seen him again. When I was about 10 years old, we lived next to a lady who was a bit strange. She had long black hair and really pale skin. She didn't come out of her house much, so we called her the vampire lady. We didn't know her name because she was so quiet, but whenever someone walked by her house, she would always stare at them. The lady's house always looked dark inside, even at night, and sometimes my mom or brothers saw strange things happening there. We weren't sure what was going on. We just noticed weird lights flickering like in a horror movie about Frankenstein. One night my friend Jess came for a sleepover. I told Jess about the weird lady across the street. Jess thought it would be a good idea to go see what was happening in the house when everyone else was asleep. I didn't really want to, but I said yes. I knew we had to be super quiet because my mom wakes up easily. She wouldn't let me go out in the dark at my age. Somehow we sneaked outside without making any noise. Now we just had to cross the street to get to the house. Jess tried to look inside through the windows, and as soon as she did, she grabbed my arm. "Come on, let's go now," she said quietly but firmly. "What, we just got here. What's wrong?" I asked as she pulled me running back across the street. She didn't tell me what she saw until we were back inside the house. Once she locked the door, she said that when she looked through the window, she saw something that looked like a video camera with a small blinking light. I said we should just go to bed and talk about it in the morning. I wish I could say that's where the story ended, but it didn't. Around 3 o'clock in the morning, Jess and I were still trying to sleep when suddenly Jess started screaming. I had a bunk bed, so I climbed up to see what was happening. That's when I saw the camera lens from earlier. Now looking into our bedroom window, my mom and brothers rushed into my room with the lights on, which must have scared the person with the camera. So I told my mom that someone was looking inside. My mom grabbed a bat from my brother's room and went outside looking around for a few minutes. When she came back, my mom asked us what the person looked like. Jess and I could only described the camera lens. We didn't see the person, but in our hearts we felt it was the lady from across the street. Even though we didn't have any proof, my mom was a bit mad that we waited until the morning to tell her how we knew it was the woman. Since then we weren't allowed near her house, and I still sometimes have bad dreams about what happened. A few years ago, I traveled solo backpacking in France. A 21-year-old female. I took a day trip to Versailles from Paris. To go there and come back, I had to use 2 different trains, but unfortunately when I was returning from Versailles, my phone battery was very low, only around 3%, so I put my phone on airplane mode and low power. I had my headphones on even though I wasn't listening to anything. A random guy, let's call him John, came and sat next to me. I had been walking in the gardens all day and Didn't feel like talking to anyone, so I pretended I didn't understand French. John then took out his phone and used Google Translate, asking if I wanted to learn French. I replied with a simple no thank you and tried to put my headphones back on to make it clear I wasn't up for chatting. However, he kept asking me questions through his phone. The next thing he asked was, "Where are you sleeping?" I didn't feel comfortable sharing my real plans, so I fibbed and told him I was staying in a large hotel with my family and that I was on my way back to them. He wanted to know where I was going, and all I told him was Paris. Then he asked if I was getting off at a specific subway stop, and I lied again, saying yes. He suggested he'd come along with me. I didn't feel comfortable with that, so I firmly said no and cut the conversation short to avoid further interaction. I quickly put my headphones on, signaling that I wanted to be left alone. Ignoring him completely, he eventually got the message and left me alone for a couple of minutes. After that, he answered a call on his phone and told his friend, "Yeah, I'll get off at X stop and you go to Y stop." This made me really nervous because Y stop was exactly where I intended to get off. When we reached the transfer station, he stood up, left the train, and positioned himself by the doors waiting for me. I took a long time to stand up, making sure I had all my things, and I did it in a way that was kind of annoying on purpose. After that guy left to catch the other train, I took my time getting off and onto the next train. I moved really slowly. I got on the train right at the front, and I kept an eye on everyone around me to make sure no one was acting strange or watching me too much. I probably seemed a bit strange to them because of how cautious I was being. When I reached X top and kept an eye on the people getting off and on the train and anyone on the platform, I didn't see him or anyone looking at me too much. When we got to Y stop, I got off with the crowd, turned the corner, and there he was with 4 friends checking out everyone who was coming out. So I quickly turned around and went the opposite way. I let my hair down from its bun and tried to look different. Once I got off the train, I ran back to my hostel. I stayed there and only went out if one of my roommates was with me. My first job was at a tiny pizza place in the town where I grew up. It's a really small town with just a bit over 1,000 people. We're located right next to a main highway, and it takes about 30 minutes to get to a big city from there. One evening around September or October, I was working with 2 other coworkers and our manager. The whole shift had been pretty slow, not many customers. We were just wrapping up and getting ready to close up shop at 9 p.m. when 2 men and a little girl about 7 or 8 years old walked into the pizza place. I walked up to the front and asked if they needed any help or if they were planning to order something. The shorter man, one of the 2, mentioned they were just passing through. Then he started asking about the prices of different items on the menu, and he also asks what time we close. So I tell him, and he just says okay and heads over to sit down with the little girl. At a booth, the taller man steps outside and goes to their car parked in front of the pizza place. From where I'm standing, I can see him looking around as if checking something. Meanwhile, inside, the little girl seems excited, pointing at the pictures on the menu. About 5 minutes later, the smaller man gets up, leans down to whisper something to the little girl, and then heads towards the exit. My coworkers and I are just watching everything and talking about how strange it seems. Then the little girl starts dancing around to the music playing on the radio. After a couple of minutes of her dance, I walk up to her and ask if she's hungry or if she wants something to drink. She says she just wants water, so I grab a cup, fill it with water, and hand it to her. She takes the water back to her seat at the booth and sits down. I go up to her and ask, "Who are you waiting for?" She smiles and says, "My dad." My coworkers and I exchange concerned glances because the 2 men haven't returned, and it's now 9:20 p.m. We're starting to wonder if neither of them is really her dad. My manager Noticing our worry decides it's time to take action. She picks up the phone and calls the police to let them know about the situation. Our town is too small for its own police station, so we have to wait for them to come from the next town, which takes at least 15 minutes. I go over to sit with her at the booth. I'm just chatting with her, making sure she's okay and nothing goes wrong before the cops arrive. While we're talking, she suddenly stands up and says she has to go. My manager and I try to tell her she has to stay in the restaurant until her dad comes back, but she starts crying and yelling and really wants to leave. Later, my manager told me the police found her walking alone down the road that night. We didn't hear anything more about what happened after that. I just hope she's safe. 3 years back, my wife and I bought our first house in the fancy part of the city, and we picked a place near my mom's house, and she's been on her own since my dad passed away. My mom was born in South Africa before there was a vaccine for polio, and she got affected by the disease. She can't move her legs, so she has been using crutches or a wheelchair all her life. My wife and I really wanted a house near her so that we could visit her a lot and take care of her. We also wanted to make sure she can be independent and do her own stuff without feeling like we're always watching her. I always worried about something happening to my mom, so it made me feel better knowing I could quickly go to her place to help, no matter if it was a small issue or a big problem. But one summer night in 2019, something bad happened which I wasn't ready for. In the middle of the summer, I drove my mom to the airport as she was going to South Africa to see her sister and my cousins because my older brother lives in another city and I'm close by. I took on the job of looking after her house while she was away, so I made sure to visit twice a week. It became my routine to water the plants, pick up the mail, check the answering machine, and do all the usual things that need doing in a house. I wanted to make sure everything was in order for when she came back home. Thankfully, a year ago, I got a security system for my mom's house. It's like having a helper that keeps an eye on things even when I'm not there. I set it up so I can use my phone to see what's happening at her place anytime if a window or door is opened or if something sets off the alarm. My phone lets me know immediately. I made sure to put everything in for security except cameras, and later in the story I'd regret not having them, but in my own house I have cameras everywhere, inside and outside. They watch over everything from my motorcycle in the garage to my snoozing dog in the living room. Fast forward a month, I finished work, hit the gym, watched a movie with my wife, and got ready for bed. Nothing unusual so far, right? But just after 2 in the morning, my phone started making a noise. I thought it might be an email or something from Instagram, so I ignored it. I really value my sleep, as I usually get around 5 hours a night. After I started dozing off, my phone kept making noise again and again. My wife woke up and said, "Turn it off." I'm trying to sleep. She often teased me about keeping the volume on at night, but I do it just in case of an emergency or if my mom needs us. I'm glad I didn't turn the volume off, because when I tried to check the notifications, it hit me suddenly like a car crashing through my living room. I got a bunch of messages from the security system at my mom's house. Right then, the company watching the system calls my phone, and I pick up. The lady on the phone tells me that the home alarm is going off because the motion detector in the basement noticed movement several times. Then she says they've sent security people to check on my mom's house to make sure everything's okay. While I was on the phone with the lady, I checked the message again from the security system. I could see what she was telling me. I also looked at the locks on my mom's doors, and the system said they were all locked. Without looking more, I suddenly understood someone or something is inside the house right now. Remember, I was suddenly woken up from sleep and told that maybe someone broke into my mother's house. I was still half asleep and I didn't have time to clear the fog in my mind. Because of that, I jumped to the wrong conclusion and I thought my mother could be in danger. I quickly got out of bed and ran to the garage. I only paused to put on my shoes and grab my car keys. It was good I had pajama pants on because it was a cold night. I didn't stop to pick up a shirt, jacket, or any kind of weapon. I was in a hurry to reach my mother's place. Luckily, I had a strong flashlight in my car like the ones the police use, which I usually bring for exploring around the city, so I grabbed the flashlight, placed it on my lap, started the car, and pushed the gas pedal down fast. I went way faster than the speed limit in the neighborhood to get to the house in a hurry. Trying to drive like a racer really wakes you up. When I reached my mom's house, I saw that all the lights were still off exactly how I had left. Then the alarm was so loud that it hurt my ears. People from nearby houses started coming outside, but there were no security patrol cars in sight. I ran to the front door while unlocking it from my phone, but when I yanked the door open, I found myself staring into the dark entryway of my mother's house. I'm ashamed to admit it, but I couldn't move. I was frozen with fear despite being 25 years old. At the time, I had never faced anything so frightening before. I've been through some pretty intense and crazy stuff before, even situations where my life was at risk, but nothing scared me as much as looking into what I was sure was the entrance to really scary things that happened in my childhood home. Just to note, at this moment, while standing at the door, my brain still hadn't reminded me that my mom was safe chilling at my aunt's beach house in South Africa. With the thought of my mom in my head, my bravery kicked, and step by step, I went into the house. I think my body's fight or flight switch got stuck on fight because I went searching instead of checking my mom's room. I literally hit the switch that turns on the lights in the basement, ready for a big fight. But you know what, to this day, I'm not sure if it was a huge relief or if I was terrified, because when I looked around, there was absolutely nothing there, not a single thing. I looked around where I was standing. The windows in the main part of the basement were fine. The lights from the motion detector were blinking, and my phone was buzzing to tell me about my own movements in the house. Then I realized standing out in the open in the basement wasn't a smart thing to do, so I ran back upstairs, turning on all the lights into the kitchen. As I went, I grabbed the biggest knife from the block. Then I went to my mother's room. I checked every corner, doorway, closet, and even under each piece of furniture. I did it slowly and carefully, making sure everything was okay until I felt sure the main floor of the house was safe. I was sure the person who shouldn't be there must be in the basement. I took out my phone and turned off the home alarm so I could listen carefully. Then I checked the main room again, under the pool table, behind the couch, and even in the bathroom, but found nothing. But as I turned to go down the hallway, I saw the door to the guest bedroom was closed. I couldn't remember if I had closed it before or during another visit, so I walked up to the door slowly, trying my best to hear any sound. I grabbed the door handle and pulled it open. I can't be sure, but I might have gotten really scared when I saw someone at the other end of the room with a big knife. I had to try my hardest not to faint. I was really scared, but I knew I had to do something. I gathered my courage bit by bit and reached for the light switch, ready to fight the intruder. The light came on and I dropped to my knees crying. That's when I realized I was looking at my own reflection. The closet door in the bedroom had mirrored panels, and in the dark, they made me see something that looked like a scary person. Then I heard a car door close outside. The guy who claimed to be a security officer was standing there, but he looked younger than me. If you imagine the word intimidating in your mind, this man was the opposite. He was a bit chubby, smiling, and had a really young-looking face. He looked more like someone welcoming you into a house. I checked my watch, and the man had come a whole hour after I told the security company to send someone. I told the guy that I searched every part of the house and didn't find anything. I started to wonder not so nice thoughts about how useless this guy pretending to be a security officer, but I'm a bit embarrassed about those thoughts now. Then he asked me if I checked the garage. My clever grin disappeared quickly. I reached for the button in my car that opens the garage door. The garage is an open space, and it's really hard to hide in there. I walked through, peeked inside the car, and then left. the garage, I felt sure it was empty. The security officer gave me some papers to sign. Basically, it said he did come when the home alarm went off. I told him about the basement motion detector showing lots of times where it recorded movement. Then I saw his face go pale as he explained that the detectors his company uses don't just sense movement, but also check for changes in temperature in the room to avoid false reports of movement. After telling me this, he got into his car and drove away. I locked up the house, turned on the outside lights, and set the security system again. I leaned against my car looking at the house, trying to figure out how the alarm could have gone off. It's supposed to work when it senses movement and heat, but there didn't seem to be anyone around. The very next day, I made sure to get security cameras installed outside the house, in the garage, and where the motion detectors were placed. It's been 2 years since that night, and I haven't shared this incident with my mom, brother, or my wife. I'm still puzzled. Was there really someone there, or was there some weird reason for the alarm going off? I really hope I never have to experience that again. Sometimes not knowing the answer is the better choice. My family and I have been living on the 6th floor for a long time. The apartment next to ours is rented out by a nasty woman, but the issue is that she tends to rent it to troublemakers. I apologize for any grammatical errors. I'm a girl and English isn't my first language, but I'm talking about serious issues like drug dealers and domestic abuse. This occurred a few years ago when I was around 14 or 15 years old. A couple between the ages of 35 and 40 had recently moved in with their young daughter, who appeared to be around 6 years old. The wife introduced herself, and at first, they were friendly and kept to themselves, which was fine with us. However, a few weeks later, things became problematic when they started playing loud music day and night. We could hear the husband shouting, but it always seemed to be him. They also started leaving their apartment door open, and when we went to use the elevator, they would be walking around in their underwear. This was odd, but we assumed it might be because it was summer and hot, which made it more annoying when we had guests because they had to pass a nearly nude man smoking. I don't mind weed, as I've also tried it a few times myself, but when they smoked, a lot of smoke would come into our apartment. It was so much that you could see it everywhere. My mom was really bothered because we had a little kid in our apartment, my brother, who was about 4 years old. We didn't want him breathing in smoke every day, but we decided to just deal with it and hope they would move out eventually like the other people who lived here before. And usually no one stayed for more than a year. One day I was coming home after walking with my dogs. We have 2 dogs, a medium-sized one and a small one, both rescued. I unlocked my apartment door and the dogs went inside. Just as I was about to follow, I heard a hey behind me. I turned around and got scared when I saw who it was. It was the husband. For more information, we hadn't talked before this. He was very close to me, like just inches away from my face. And also, he was only in his underwear. He was taller than me by a lot, so I felt uncomfortable. I asked if he needed something, and then he quickly looked around as if checking for other people in the small hallway we shared. After that, he came even closer, and I could feel his breath on my face. It smelled like weed, and I tried not to gag so I wouldn't be rude. At that time, I always tried to be nice to everyone, even in risky situations like this. Then, in a rough voice, he whispered, "What do you want?" I asked him to repeat, "What do you want? Drugs?" Since I was perplexed and assumed I had misheard alcohol, I was trained not to use drugs or alcohol, and even if that weren't the case, I was obviously young, so I didn't understand why he was giving me these things. "Oh, no, thank you, sir." My eyes became very large. If you're wondering why I didn't just go inside sooner, I explained that I was a major people pleaser and didn't want to offend him. I also didn't know how he would react because I didn't want to risk him chasing me inside or attacking me. I had hoped that by being polite, this interaction would be over and I could go inside. If he was unstable enough to corner a teenage girl in his underwear and offer her illegal substances, I didn't want to think about what would have happened if I pissed him off. "Oh, come on, you must want something because I can hook you up with whatever." He gave me a big G grin and moved closer, but I moved my back against the door, realizing that I couldn't put any more distance between us. I laughed nervously. "No thanks, my mom wouldn't like me having that." He tilted his head, still grinning. "Is she home now?" I replied, "No, she was at work." "Well, silly me, she was at work, so she didn't need to know." A man standing over me and trapping me made me feel nervous because I've had issues with men being mean to me in the past. I thought I might throw up, and I started to shake. I hoped he wouldn't notice, so I said again, "I have to go as I have homework to do," and I tried to smile so he wouldn't know I was scared, but my shaking got worse. He seemed irritated, but he nodded and said, "Have a nice day." I hurried inside and quietly locked the door, breathing heavily, trying to peek through the small hole, but he was still there. He seemed to be out of it as he stayed there for another 30 minutes or so, simply looking at my door. I prayed he would go. I was getting really scared, so I grabbed my phone, called my dogs, and hurried to the kitchen to get the biggest knife I could find. I sat on the floor and stared at the door while I called my mom, who was on the verge of tears when she answered, telling me to call the police if I thought I was in danger. However, I said no, perhaps because I didn't want to bother the police for something that might not be a big deal. My mom couldn't leave work early, so she called the police as soon as she got home. His wife had returned a few minutes later, and when she knocked on our door, she asked me a lot of questions about what I told her and what had happened. When my mom explained that the police had been called, the wife nervously laughed and said that it wasn't necessary. "My husband didn't mean any harm. He was just trying to sell you some CDs he makes because he really likes music." What he kept asking me if I wanted alcohol multiple times. How did she start talking about selling CDs? My mom didn't buy it, and she knows what really happened. The woman's smile turned to anger, and she returned to the apartment. We heard her lock the doors, close all the curtains, and turn off the lights. The police came to investigate, knocked on their door, but no one answered, so we told them that we had seen everyone go inside and lock themselves in, but they were powerless to stop it because they lacked special permission, and no one had physically harmed me. They said the man would receive a warning, but only after they could get in touch with him did they depart. We didn't hear from the neighbors throughout the day, so we went to bed. Later, I had a hard time falling asleep, but I eventually managed to do so at around 2 in the morning. I heard a woman screaming loudly and very disturbingly, and I thought that someone might be in trouble. My mom went to the nearest window and told me to stay in bed. I wanted to ask her more about what was going on, but I trusted her, so I did as she said and eventually fell asleep again. When I woke up, she sat me down at the kitchen table and explained that the man from yesterday had jumped out of the window during the night because we were on the 6th floor, and he probably died when he hit the ground. His wife had been watching him climb out of the window and then jump, and she was unable to stop him. I felt terrible. I was at home with my little brother because he was sick, and I wasn't going to school because I was too upset. A few days later, when my mom left for work, there was a knock at the door. I looked through the peephole and saw that it was the guy's wife, who was smoking a cigarette. Her eyes were red, and she looked really upset. She was walking around and talking to herself. I told my little brother to go into his room, and she went to open the door when I did. And when she saw me, she became very irate and pointed her cigarette close to my face. "Why did you call the police on my husband? He didn't hurt you. He was only trying to sell you some CDs, and you reported him. Are you afraid of males in general or of guys wearing underpants in particular?" I couldn't believe what she was saying. If it had been me today, I would have told her to leave and closed the door in her face, but I was too young and naive at the time, so I chose to apologize and express my sincere hope that she would forgive me for her husband. "You little fragment of __, you are solely to blame for killing my husband, and I hope that you, your mother, and your brother all suffer from illnesses and die away." Since I've been talking to someone about my feelings and taking medication for the past year or two, I can say that I'm in a better place now. I looked down at the ground without saying anything, still certain that it was my fault that she kept saying hurtful things, but eventually she left. I went back inside, locked the doors, and cried for about 30 minutes. My younger brother kept asking what was wrong, but I didn't tell him. We enjoyed staying up late when I stayed at my friend's home in middle school, but the restroom was next to his parents' room, and we didn't want to get in trouble for waking them up, particularly on those late nights. The call of nature, so to avoid any problems we came up with a plan. Instead of using the bathroom, we quietly sneaked out through the basement door and went into the woods to take care of business. The door was almost always open because we sometimes forgot our keys and got locked out. It happened a lot since we often went out to do things in the woods. On this night, my friend's older brother was around and he kept barging in through the basement door, making the situation even more chaotic, so we came up with a plan to try and stop my friend's brother from constantly barging in. We decided to lock the door even though we knew it wouldn't really keep him out. The idea was that he'd have to use the key, and maybe that would take away some of the fun for him. But around midnight we heard the door handle jiggling. At first I didn't think much of it, assuming it was just his brother messing around. Then after about 5 minutes of the handle being jiggled on and off, we got a bit frustrated. That's when we decided to take action. We went up to the door, hit it, and shouted at him to stop. However, all we got in response was silence. That was a good thing, and we hoped it was all over right. But about 10 minutes later the jiggling started again, and it kept happening. This whole thing repeated for about 2 hours. No matter how many times we told him to stop, he didn't listen. We got frustrated and just said forget it and decided to ignore him. Even after we stopped paying attention, he kept going for about half an hour more. It felt like forever. Then finally he gave up. Let's jump ahead to around 900 in the morning. We were just waking up and one of my friend needed to use the bathroom. You know how it is at sleepovers, people are sleeping wherever there's space. When one person starts moving around, it wakes everyone up. We all started stretching and heading to the bathroom to get rid of the soda we drank the night before. As I walked out, I grabbed the door handle to close it behind me and noticed it felt weird, like it had a rough texture. When I checked it, I saw that the area around the keyhole was messed up. There were big scratch marks everywhere and the metal parts were all bent and crooked. I asked my friend who lived there what happened, and he said it was the first time he noticed it. We didn't want to get blamed for what his brother did, so we went upstairs and explained everything to his parents. When his dad went downstairs to see what we were talking about, his face went all pale and he hurried back upstairs to call the police. It turned out that someone had been trying to force the lock open while we were all in the house. It was pretty scary to think that someone had been trying to get in while we were sleeping. This happened to me more than once on different occasions. What made me really scared this time was that the person knew we were in the house. and we knew someone was trying to break in, but he still kept trying to force his way inside, and it was pretty disturbing. I have no idea what kind of person he was or what he had in mind for us that night. When I was 19 years old, I had a job in a small mall in my quiet town. In our town, not many serious crimes happen, and it's a peaceful place. However, the city that's about 15 minutes away used to have the highest murder rates in Canada. The mall where I worked was not too big, and it was a common spot for moms with their kids and older people looking to pass the time. It's a really safe mall where I work, not a sketchy one at all. But one day, during my break, I headed to the food court to grab a drink. And scrolling my phone just like I always do, as I sat there, I noticed two women walking towards me. My first guess was that they saw my work uniform, and I thought they might have questions about something my store sells. I didn't think anything bad was happening. They walked up to me and sat down quickly at my table in the food court. Both of them talked with strong accents, though I wasn't sure what kind, because I hadn't heard it before. They were dressed really fancy, like they were going to church or a special event, and seemed pretty regular. Nothing strange about them. Then one of the women takes out a book and they start asking me some strange questions like, do you go to church? Do you believe in God? Mostly things about religion, so I think they might be some kind of missionaries. They start telling me about God the Mother. Since I'm really shy, I just listen to them talk. Then they invite me to a youth group they organized for that evening. I'm a bit surprised, not expecting such an invitation during my mall break. I told them that I was at work taking a break and that I couldn't go with them. They insisted that I had to repeat this several times before they finally understood, but they still wanted my phone number. They said they would text me the details the next time they organized something, which made me a little uncomfortable, but I gave it to them to end the conversation. A few days later, I received a text from them attempting to plan something for the youth group. I felt a little trapped because I wasn't really interested, but I didn't want to be rude, so I hesitated for a moment before deciding to block the number. I wasn't worried that they were going to do something bad. I was just not into the idea of attending a youth group. I hoped that blocking the number would make it obvious that I wasn't interested without having to explain. When I was reading the news a few months later, I came across an article alerting teenage girls in our community to a human trafficking operation. According to the article, ladies would approach others and discuss God the Mother in an attempt to persuade them to accompany them on their journey. I was relieved to discover that I hadn't completed my shift that day when those ladies approached me. I was also grateful that I hadn't replied to their text. It's odd to consider how a seemingly little choice like that may have protected me. One of my best friends and I shared an apartment a few years ago when I was 25. Unfortunately, our friendship began to wane because she didn't visit often, but on this particular night, she chose to stay over and go to bed early because I frequently stayed up late at work. At that time, my routine consisted of watching YouTube videos and unwinding, so this night was fairly normal. But something strange happened. My neighbors actually tried to kidnap me. Let me tell you a little bit more about my residence and my neighbors. Our house had 3 bedrooms, and the kitchen faced a young couple who lived in a smaller mill house. They kept knocking on our door and asking for strange things. I'm usually cool with helping neighbors, but these requests were kind of odd. For example, they wanted us to fill up this old Mountain Dew bottle with water because theirs got turned off or something. They also asked for beer, and one time they literally asked us for just $1. It was getting a bit weird. When we didn't answer, I'd peek through the window to check. It was strange. Sometimes I'd catch them grabbing leftover cigarette butts from the ashtray or squishing their eyes against the door. peephole trying to see if we were home, so I'm sitting on the couch watching YouTube when I hear a knock at the door. I rolled my eyes because I knew exactly who was knocking. It was 11 p.m. And when I checked through the little door window there, he was the boyfriend on my porch. Normally I'd just ignore it and go on with my night, but this time he looked kind of troubled, so I decided to open the door and see what was up. Hey, I just wanted to ask if you could do me a favor. I got a ring here in my pocket for my girlfriend, and I need someone to record the moment. Can you follow me to my backyard and film it for me? He nervously asked. It was unexpected. I was pretty confused, but really wanted to find out what was happening. I congratulated him and told him I'd join in a moment. I just needed to put on my shoes. Once I closed and locked the door, I rushed to the back room with a view of their backyard. Peeking through the blinds, I expected to see some decorations or a setup, but it was totally dark, no signs of anything. It felt odd. So without wasting time, I woke up my roommate to share the whole story with her. No way, she told me, and we both walked back to the door. After the boyfriend started banging on it, I peeked through the little door window again. It was pretty dark outside and I couldn't see much. Then I saw him move his eye away from the peephole. It gave me a chill and I quickly turned around, pressing my back against the door. My roommate hurried back to the door from her room, grabbing 2 wire hangers like they were shields. We both clung to the hangers and sat against the door until he finally left. It was pretty scary, but we wanted to be sure we weren't overreacting, so we decided to go out through the back door and hopped into her car for a quick drive around the neighborhood. They always kept their front door wide open and there were no blinds, so you could easily see inside their house. We drove by slowly in her car, sneaking into the living room. On the couch, the couple and the older man were all just sitting there staring at the wall. We quickly drove away and decided to stay at a friend's house that night. After that, I stopped answering the door for them, but one day when I came home from work, I noticed an older lady parked in their driveway. As I got out of my car, she walked up to me and asked if I knew where the neighbors were. I explained that I hadn't seen them in quite a while. Then I asked her who she was, and she informed me that she was the owner of the house. She told me they hadn't paid rent for months, and it led to her having to evict them. When she went inside the house, it was a disaster. Needles scattered, garbage all over walls, with holes and even a mess on the floor. I expressed my sympathy for what she had to deal with and mentioned that I was glad they were finally out, but thinking about the condition of their house, I felt a sense of relief that I hadn't followed him to the backyard, and who knows what he might have had planned that night. It was my time to go out with my kids for Halloween last year. My wife did it, and we switch every year. My son is 7 and my daughter is 9, and they were super excited, all dressed up in their cool costumes. I usually stay on the street keeping an eye on them while they run from house to house for candy. After about 30 minutes of walking, we reached a really good spot for getting lots of candy. A busy street in our neighborhood. There were so many cool decorations and things in people's front yards, so I got a little distracted and I wasn't paying close attention to my kids. Then a few minutes later, they came back from a house with another girl who was about the height as my daughter, but the interesting thing was she had this really weird homemade mask on. It looked like it was made from some kind of cardboard or similar material. Then my daughter asked if her new friend could come along for trick-or-treating. I said of course, so we all went together as a group. I didn't know much about the girl, but I guessed she might be a friend from school or somewhere. As we walked, I noticed a really tall man following us. He was big and I started to feel a bit uneasy. I couldn't figure out if he was just enjoying the decorations too or if something else was going on. He had this mask that looked like an angry cat, which kind of gave me the shivers. Then I thought he might be the girl's dad, so I tried to start a little conversation with him. I said something like, "Nice weather, huh?" But he didn't Reply, he just stood there staring at me with that creepy cat mask while our kids went up the stairs to the next house. I tried to brush it off thinking maybe he's just not a talkative person. I asked again saying, "Hey, is that your daughter?" He just nodded, but he still didn't say anything. I thought maybe he's just not into talking, so I stopped trying to chat with him. We kept going for about 15 more minutes, going to different houses and collecting more candy. Then my kids came up to me and said they wanted to go home. This surprised me because we hadn't been out for too long and their bags were only about a third full anyway. I said, "Well," we waved the man in the cat mask and his daughter off before heading home. But the odd thing was that when I turned to face them again, they were just standing there, staring at us. I checked again as we turned the corner, and they were still standing there, not moving at all. At this point, I asked my kids, "Who was that girl?" My daughter looked up at me with a really confused look on her face. "She's your friend," my daughter replied, looking pretty confused too. I was puzzled because I didn't recognize the girl and it seemed odd that my daughter thought she was my friend. I asked her what she meant by that. Turns out the girl with the cardboard mask had come up to my kids. She told my daughter that she was a friend of mine and explained that she was too shy to ask me directly if she could join us for trick-or-treating, so she hoped my daughter could ask me on her behalf. I didn't know the girl, but it seemed like a misunderstanding. Maybe she thought she knew me or got confused. "Why would you think she was my friend? I don't have any friends who are kids." What my daughter said next truly surprised me and sent a chill down my spine. She explained that when the girl with the cardboard mask first came up to them, she wasn't even wearing the mask, so they saw her face and it wasn't someone familiar. I couldn't understand why the girl would say she was my friend if we didn't even recognize each other. Later we found out that she wasn't a girl at all. She was actually an older woman about my age with wrinkles on her face. What's even more disturbing is that this older woman had been quietly taking treats from my daughter's bag when I wasn't looking. That's why they wanted to go home, because they noticed the woman taking their candies. I took my children home and told my wife about everything. We carefully examined all of their candy and found nothing unusual or suspicious, so we didn't call the police or anything. However, now that I think about it, I kind of wish we had chosen a different course of action. It's strange that some individuals dress up like children for Halloween. I'm a 22-year-old French student who is now studying in Amsterdam for my master's degree. I live on my own in an apartment within a student-only building. The neighborhood is calm and nice, with the occasional sounds of trams passing by or the distant noise of parties in other student buildings. But one night, it was around 10 o'clock, when I heard a knock on my apartment door. I live on the third floor, and to reach my front door you have to use a key to open the main entrance, and then another key to open the door to my hallway. This means that only people with a key can come in. If someone wants to visit, they can give me a call or ring my doorbell and I'll open the door for them. It adds an extra layer of security to our building, ensuring that only authorized people can access our floors on a regular day. When I heard someone knocking on my door, I usually open the door without much thought, whether it's my landlord checking in or a neighbor asking for something. As I've mentioned, I generally feel safe in my building and I can take care of myself if needed, but this time, for some reason, I had an uneasy feeling. It's not that I felt an immediate danger, but something felt off. At first I didn't do anything as I figured the person would go away. I had just finished my assignment and wanted some peace, but the knocking didn't stop. I stayed put, thinking they'd leave soon and I could finally relax after my hard work. However, the knocking continued for a good 30 seconds, so I decided to speak up and said hello. The voice responded in English, stating that it was Uber Eats. This seemed odd because most people here speak Dutch, and I recognized the voices of the people who live on my floor, but the person claiming to be from Uber Eats wasn't my landlord or neighbor, and I didn't place any orders there that day. It made me feel a bit confused. Also, the voice sounded strange, like maybe someone playing a prank or a neighbor trying to trick me. It was a deep voice, maybe around 40 years old, and definitely sounded like a person who smokes a lot. I said I didn't order anything, you might have the wrong address, but a few seconds later the knocking kept going and the same voice said, I'm pretty sure you did. I have an order under your name now. That made me panic. I looked around and grabbed a baseball bat just in case he tried to break the door because the knocking was getting louder and stronger. I checked if the door was locked, and to my horror it wasn't. I was only 10 centimeters away from him and my front door was the only thing keeping him from coming in, but luckily the door didn't open from the outside without a key even though it wasn't locked. So I took a step back and asked again, what's the name? He seemed to be thinking for a few seconds, and then there was another loud knock. It felt like he was really angry and frustrated. Then, after a few minutes, he gave up and went down the emergency stairs next to my apartment. The steps were really loud, and it seemed like the person was in a big hurry. I wasn't sure what he wanted or what might happen if I opened the door. I still don't get how he got through the first 2 doors. Then I thought if he tried knocking on other doors before mine, so I shared the incident on our building's WhatsApp group asking if anyone else had seen something unusual. It turns out nobody witnessed anything suspicious and no one had opened the door for anyone else, but I'm fortunate that my instincts kicked in warning me not to open the door. I had been hiking the Appalachian Trail for weeks, enjoying the peace and quiet of the wilderness. The trail stretched out before me, a ribbon of dirt winding through dense forests, across rolling hills, and over rocky mountains. I was alone, but I liked it that way. The solitude gave me time to think and the chance to truly connect with nature. Every day I would hike from sunrise to sunset, stopping only to eat or rest my tired legs. At night, I would find a spot to set up my tent and fall asleep to the sounds of the forest. One evening after a long day of hiking, I found a perfect spot to camp. It was a bit off the main trail in a small clearing surrounded by tall trees. The sun was setting, casting a warm golden light over everything. I set up my tent, cooked a simple dinner, and sat by a small fire watching the flames dance and flicker. The forest was alive with the sounds of birds, insects, and the rustling of leaves. I felt at peace, happy to be alone in such a beautiful place. As darkness fell, I crawled into my tent and settled into my sleeping bag, ready for a good night's sleep. The fire had died down and the forest around me was quiet. I closed my eyes and started to drift off. Then sometime around midnight, I woke up with a start. I lay still, listening. At first I heard nothing but the sound of my own breathing. Then I heard footsteps crunching on the leaves outside my tent. My heart began to pound in my chest. I held my breath, straining to hear. The footsteps were slow and deliberate, moving closer to my tent. I could hear them circling around me, pausing now and then as if someone or something was listening to. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. I was miles from the nearest town, far from any other hikers who could be out here in the middle of the night. I reached for my flashlight and slowly unzipped my tent just enough to peek outside. I shone the light into the darkness, but I couldn't see anything. The footsteps stopped. I listened for what felt like an eternity, but all I heard was the distant hoe of an owl. I convinced myself it was just an animal, a deer or a raccoon maybe, and tried to calm down. I zipped the tent back up and laid down, but sleep wouldn't come. My mind was racing, imagining all sorts of dangers lurking in the dark. Then, just as I was beginning to relax, I heard something even more terrifying, a soft whisper, almost like a chant, coming from just outside my tent. The voice was low and mumbled, and I couldn't make out the words, but it sent a chill down my spine. I froze, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure it would give me away. Who was out there whispering in the middle of the night? I grabbed my flashlight again and unzipped the tent, this time more quickly. I shone the light in every direction, my hands shaking again. There was nothing, just the silent trees and the darkness pressing in around me, but the whispering continued, a constant eerie murmur that seemed to come from all around me. I felt a surge of panic. I was alone in the wilderness with no way to call for help, and someone was out there watching me. I knew I had to get out of there. I threw my things into my backpack, my hands trembling. I packed up my tent in record time, my ears straining for any sound. The whispering seemed to follow me, growing louder as I stumbled through the dark forest, trying to find the main trail. My flashlight beam bounced wildly, casting strange shadows on the trees. Every rustle, every snap of a twig made me jump. Finally, after what felt like hours, I found the main trail. I started walking quickly, then broke into a run. I didn't stop until the sun began to rise, casting a pale light over the forest. Only then did I feel safe enough to stop and catch my breath. I never found out who or what was out there that night, but the experience haunted me for the rest of my hike, a reminder that even in the most peaceful places there can be hidden dangers. In late September 2019, I was on a solo bike trip around the United States. I had loaded up my bicycle with camping gear and set out to explore the country. One evening, I found myself in rural Montana, far from the nearest town. It was getting late, and I needed a place to camp for the night. I found a quiet spot deep in the forest, far from any roads or houses. It seemed perfect for a peaceful night's sleep. As I set up my tent, I noticed how quiet it was. There were no sounds of traffic, no voices, not even the usual chirping of crickets. It was completely silent. At first, I thought it was a nice change from the noise of everyday life. I finished setting up camp, cooked a simple dinner, and settled into my tent. As darkness fell, lying in my sleeping bag, I couldn't help but notice the eerie silence. There was no wind, no rustling leaves, no sounds of animals moving through the forest. It felt unnatural. I tried to ignore it, telling myself that the quiet was a rare treat and I should enjoy it. But as I lay there, I started to feel uneasy. Suddenly, I heard footsteps outside my tent. They were slow and deliberate, crunching softly on the forest floor. My heart started to race. I listened carefully, trying to determine what kind of animal it might be, but the steps were too heavy to be a small creature. They were steady and purposeful, moving around my tent in a slow circle. I grabbed my flashlight and knife, my hands trembling. I unzipped the tent just a little and shone the light outside, sweeping it around in a wide arc. There was nothing there. The footsteps stopped as soon as the light hit the trees. I waited, holding my breath, but the forest remained empty and silent. I z'd the tent back up, my mind racing with possibilities. Maybe it was just my imagination, or perhaps a deer or another animal curious about my campsite. I tried to calm down and go back to sleep, but the footsteps started again, closer this time. They moved slowly around my tent, stopping every few steps, as if whoever was out there was listening for something. I felt a cold sweat on my forehead. I knew I couldn't stay here. I quickly packed up my things, trying to make as little noise as possible. Every rustle of my sleeping bag, every clink of my cooking gear seemed unbearably loud in the silent forest. The footsteps continued, a constant reminder that I was not alone. I finally had everything packed and ready to go. I unzipped the tent and stepped outside, my flashlight in one hand and my knife in the other. I shone the light around one last time, but there was still nothing. The footsteps stopped as I moved, but the feeling of being watched remained. I got on my bike and pedaled away as fast as I could, the beam of my headlamp cutting through the darkness. I didn't look back, afraid of what I might see. I rode for what felt like hours, until I reached a small clearing where I could see the first light of dawn breaking through the trees. Only then did I feel safe enough to stop and catch my breath. The experience haunted me for the rest of my trip. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, and every time I camped in a remote area, I found myself listening for those slow, deliberate footsteps. The forest, which I had always found so peaceful, now felt like a place of hidden dangers. I never found out what or who was out there that night, but the memory of those footsteps and the eerie silence stayed with me, a reminder that even in the most tranquil places there can be unseen threats. It was a lesson in the unpredictability of nature and the importance of trusting your instincts. My friends and I had been hiking the West Coast Trail on Vancouver Island for a few days. It's a beautiful rugged trail that runs along the coast with stunning views of the ocean and dense lush forests. We were having a great time enjoying the adventure and the challenge of the hike. We were also looking forward to the end of each day when we could set up camp, relax, and share stories around the campfire. One evening after a long day of hiking, we found a nice spot to camp. It was a small clearing close to the beach with a great view of the sunset. We set up our tents, gathered some firewood, and cooked our dinner. As the sun dipped below the horizon, we sat by the fire talking and laughing. The forest around us was alive with the sounds of birds and insects. Everything seemed perfect. As the night grew darker, we noticed that the usual sounds of the forest had started to fade away. It became eerily quiet. We all felt a strange sense of unease. Trying to shake off the feeling, we continued to chat and roast marshmallows. Suddenly, one of my friends pointed towards the tree. "Look over there," she whispered. We all turned to see what she was pointing at. There, just beyond the light of our campfire, were a pair of glowing eyes. They were close to the ground and didn't move. We all stared, trying to make out what kind of animal it was. Then slowly it stepped into the light. It was a cougar. It was large, with sleek, powerful muscles and a focused gaze. It didn't seem afraid of us at all. Instead, it just stood there watching us. We all froze, unsure of what to do. I had heard stories about cougars stalking people, but I never thought I would encounter one. My heart pounded in my chest, and I could see the same fear in my friend's eyes. We tried to make ourselves look bigger, waving our arms and shouting, hoping to scare it away, but the cougar didn't budge. It just kept staring at us with those unblinking eyes. We decided to move our camp further down the trail, hoping to put some distance between us and the cougar. We quickly packed up our gear, keeping one eye on the cougar the whole time. As we started to move, the cougar began to follow us silently and effortlessly. It stayed just at the edge of our campfire's light, moving when we moved, stopping when we stopped. The forest was completely silent except for the sound of our own hurried footsteps and the occasional snap of a twig. We walked for what felt like hours, our nerves on edge. The cougar's eyes never left us, glowing in the dark like two tiny flames. We could hear its low growls, a constant reminder that it was still there, stalking us. None of us dared to stop or rest. We just kept moving, hoping to find a ranger station or some other sign of safety. Finally, as the first light of dawn began to break through the trees, we saw a small wooden sign pointing to a ranger station a few miles ahead. We quickened our pace, almost running now, desperate to reach safety. The cougar followed us all the way to the edge of the forest, then disappeared back into the trees. We didn't stop until we reached the ranger station. Exhausted and terrified, we told the ranger what had happened. He listened carefully and then told us we were lucky to be alive. Bears that are not afraid of humans can be very dangerous, he said. We probably surprised the cougar in its territory, and it was just following us to make sure we left. Hearing that didn't make us feel any better. The rest of our hike was tense. Every rustle in the bushes, every shadow in the trees made us jump. We finished the trail, but the memory of those glowing eyes and the feeling of being hunted stayed with us. It was a reminder that no matter how beautiful and peaceful nature can seem, it's also wild and unpredictable. 3 years ago, I decided to hike the Smoky Mountains with my dog. It was a beautiful day, and the sun was shining through the trees as we made our way along the trail. I loved the feeling of being surrounded by nature, far away from the hustle and bustle of everyday life. My dog, a large and friendly Labrador named Max, trotted happily by my side, sniffing at everything and wagging his tail. We had been hiking for about 3 hours. When we came to a fork in the trail, I checked my map and decided to take the left path, which would take us to a beautiful viewpoint. As we walked, I started to notice that the forest was getting quieter. The birds had stopped singing, and even the insects seemed to have fallen silent. It felt strange, but I shrugged it off and kept walking. A few minutes later, I spotted something up ahead. I stopped and squinted, trying to see what it was. As we got closer, I realized it was a mother bear and her two cubs. My heart skipped a beat. I knew that getting too close to a bear, especially a mother with cubs, could be dangerous. I slowly backed away, keeping my eyes on the bears. Max stood still, his ears perked up, but thankfully he didn't bark. Once we were a safe distance away, I decided to take the other path. At the fork, we retraced our steps and started down the right path. As we walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. I kept looking over my shoulder, but I didn't see anything. Max seemed to sense something too. He stayed close to me, his ears constantly twitching. About half a mile down the trail, I saw fresh prints in the dirt. They were large, much larger than Max's paws, and they had a distinctive shape. My stomach tightened as I realized they were cougar prints. Cougars are elusive and dangerous, and knowing one was nearby made me very uneasy. I decided it was time to turn back. We started walking back towards the car, picking up the pace. The forest was still eerily quiet, and every snap of a twig made me jump. As we walked, I started hearing faint whispers, like someone calling my name. I looked around, but there was no one. The whispers seemed to be coming from all directions, and they grew louder as we walked. My mind raced. I knew we were alone, but the whispers was so clear I felt the chill run down my spine. Max was also on edge. His tail was tucked between his legs, and he stayed close to my side. I tried to stay calm, telling myself it was just my imagination, but the whispers didn't stop. They were constant, and they made my skin crawl. As we got closer to the car, the whispers faded, but the feeling of being watched didn't go away. I kept looking around, expecting to see someone or something following us, but the trail remained empty. We finally reached the parking lot, and I let out a sigh of relief. I quickly loaded Max into the car and got unlocking the doors behind me. As I drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching us. I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see a figure standing at the edge of the forest, but there was nothing. The drive home was tense, and I kept looking in the mirrors, paranoid that something was following us. When we finally got home, I felt a wave of relief. I let Max out of the car, and we both went inside, glad to be safe. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about the whispers and the feeling of being watched. It was the most unsettling experience of my life, and it made me wary of hiking alone in the future. I haven't been back to the Smoky Mountains since that day. The beauty of the forest was overshadowed by the eerie silence, the fresh cougar prints, and the haunting whispers. It was a reminder that even in the most peaceful places there can be hidden dangers, and sometimes it's best to trust your instincts and turn back. I met this guy while I was still with my boyfriend, but despite being 10 years older than me, if I recall correctly, he wasn't someone I found attractive. We only had about 20 minutes conversation, and it was all very impersonal and polite exchanges. I only talked to him when it was absolutely necessary. It was just basic talk, nothing more. While my boyfriend and I started dating, and somehow that other guy knew about it. One night, when we were excited to go to the club together, we noticed that this guy was following us. It made me nervous, and I started freaking out. I ran to the bathroom with my friend for safety while our boyfriend turned around to talk to him. That guy, however, started acting really immature, like a 5-year-old boy. He even started crying and then ran away, leaving the nightclub. Then about a month later, I found a disturbing love letter in my mailbox. It was creepy because he had delivered it himself to my house, meaning that this guy had followed me to my door before and found out where I live. Fast forward 1 year, and I don't go to the place I met him anymore because he practically lives there. My friends told me he hangs out there every day, almost like he's waiting for me to show up. We moved after a while, and during that summer at the new place, I started noticing that guy at the mall. At first I thought it was just a coincidence, but then a shop owner I know well tells me that the guy's been following me and even hides when I turn around. That really worried me, so I shared the whole story with the shop owner. He was concerned too and promised to let other store owners know about the situation. He also assured me that he would call security the next time if he sees that creepy guy following me. I now have my own first professional level full-time stalker, and my boyfriend and I were clueless about what to do. My family was just as lost, and we were super worried. The police couldn't do much since this guy wasn't doing anything harmful at the time. It's been well over 2 years and things are I don't want to work as a waitress, even though I really need the money, because I know he would find out where I work and then sit there all day and night just watching me. I try not to work anywhere near the place I first met this guy, especially around the city center. Going to the mall alone is a no-go for me now. I always bring my boyfriend along. There are specific supermarkets and cafes I steer clear of because I know he hangs out there hoping to see me. It's disturbing, and because I don't even know his last name, but he has a strange control over where I can go or not. I really wish I could leave the city, but it's not easy. Even if I'm meant to go somewhere else, he knows both my first and last name, and all I know about him is his first name and what he looks like. It's kind of scary because he could find me easily. The situation might get even riskier once I finish university. I'm aiming for a teaching position, and they put all your information on the internet, so it makes me worry about my safety and what he might do.